Imagine sitting in class, trying to stay invisible, and suddenly your teacher walks toward you, holding a pair of scissors. In front of everyone, she raises them and cuts your hair. Not because you broke a rule, not because of school policy, but because she didn't like the way you looked. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, for Jayden Parker, this wasn't just a bad dream, it was real. And what happened next shocked an entire nation. Stay with us till the end, because this story is about to get intense. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so we can keep bringing you more powerful true stories that deserve to be heard. Let's hit 1,000 subscribers together. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt like you didn't belong? Like the air changed the moment you stepped in? That's exactly how Jayden Parker felt the first time he set foot inside Ridgewood Middle School. His stomach tightened and a lump formed in his throat. It wasn't just first-day nerves, it was something heavier. Jayden had just moved with his mom from Atlanta to this small town in Ohio. His mom, Monica Parker, had gotten a nursing job at Ridgewood Regional Hospital in Jayden. He was the new kid again. New school, new faces, new everything. But what Jayden didn't know yet was that Ridgewood Middle wasn't just another school. It was a place where he was about to face something far worse than being the awkward new kid. His first class of the day was English with Miss Dillard. The moment he walked into her classroom, the room seemed to go silent. Not in the new student curiosity way, but in the something's about to happen way. Ms. Dillard stood at the front tapping a red pen against her clipboard, her eyes narrowing the moment they landed on Jayden. Her gaze lingered on his hair, his long, neatly twisted dreadlocks that he'd been growing for years. They weren't messy, they weren't in his face, but still, her lips pressed into a thin line like she was already judging him. "Mr. Parker, is it?" she said, without even glancing at the class roster in her hand. "You'll sit in the back. And please, keep your hair out of your face. I like to see my students' eyes when I'm speaking to them." Jayden froze for a second. His hair wasn't even in his face. He glanced around the room, catching the quick smirks and exchanged looks between students. Some of them chuckled under their breath. Others just stared at their notebooks, pretending not to notice. Trying to shake it off, Jayden made his way to the back of the room and sank into the chair. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He told himself it was just nerves. Maybe she was like this with everyone. But that hope didn't last long. By lunchtime, Jayden felt like he was being watched everywhere he went. When he grabbed a tray and sat alone near the window, a group of boys in varsity jackets walked past him, snickering loud enough for him to hear. "Looks like the new kid's already on Miss Dillard's radar," one of them muttered. "Bet he doesn't last a week," another added. Jayden clenched his jaw and stared at his tray, pushing his food around without taking a bite. After school, as he walked toward the bus loop, trying to shake off the heavy feeling in his chest, he heard a voice yell out behind him. Jayden Parker. "Stop right there." He turned to see Miss Dillard striding across the parking lot like she was on some kind of mission. She held a piece of paper in her hand, his homework from English class. Homework he had barely understood because, well, it was his first day. "This," she said, waving the paper in front of him like it was something disgusting. "This is sloppy, unacceptable work. If this is the kind of effort you're bringing to my classroom, Mr. Parker, you're in for a very long semester. Bring it back tomorrow rewritten, and make it legible this time, or there will be consequences." Jayden felt his face heat up. His ears burned with embarrassment. A few kids at nearby buses had turned to watch the scene unfold. Whispers started. A couple of kids pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages, but definitely recording. Jayden wanted to disappear. That night, sitting on his bed staring at the ceiling, Jayden felt something building in his chest. Anger, confusion, fear, all tangled together. His mom knocked softly on his door, poking her head in with that worried mom look. "How was your first day, baby?" she asked gently. Jayden hesitated. He opened his mouth to say something, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. "It was fine," he finally whispered. But deep down he knew it wasn't fine, not even close, and something told him. Tomorrow was going to be even worse. The next morning, Jayden stood in front of the mirror staring at his reflection. He adjusted his hoodie, trying to tuck some of his dreadlocks inside, hoping to avoid drawing more attention. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hide who he was, and deep down he knew that hiding wouldn't change anything. Walking into Ridgewood Middle School felt like walking into a lion's den. Every hallway felt longer, every stare from passing students more intense. By the time he reached Ms. Dillard's classroom, his heart was pounding so loudly he could barely hear himself think. He slid into his seat at the back, trying to make himself invisible. But Ms. Dillard had other plans. "Mr. Parker," she called out before class even started, holding his rewritten homework high for everyone to see. "Better, but still not what I expect from my students." Jayden felt his face flush. The class was watching him again. Again. Throughout the lesson, she called on him repeatedly, picking apart his answers, interrupting him mid-sentence, making sarcastic remarks about his lack of focus. At one point, when he stumbled over a word while reading aloud, she let out an exaggerated sigh. "This is why we pay attention in class. Mr. Parker," she said, shaking her head. Jayden clenched his fists under the desk, biting the inside of his cheek to stop himself from saying something he'd regret. During lunch, it got worse. He walked into the cafeteria tray in hand and heard it. A group of kids had started a chant. "Dillard's favorite. Dillard's favorite." The words stung. Not because they meant he was liked, but because they meant he was a target. He sat down quickly, lowering his head, trying to block it all out. But the whispers, the laughs, they followed him like a shadow. Later that day in gym class, he tripped over a ball during warm-ups. Two boys burst out laughing. One of them, a tall kid named Ryan, leaned over and said just loud enough for others to hear, "Watch out, Parker. Miss Dillard's going to give you detention for breathing wrong." Jayden forced a bitter smile, pretending it didn't bother him. But it did. When the final bell rang, he rushed to his locker, eager to get out of the building. As he grabbed his backpack, a folded piece of paper fell out. He opened it quickly, his heart sinking as he read the words scribbled in block letters, "Go back to where you came from." No signature, no name. But the message was loud and clear. On the bus ride home, Jayden sat by the window, staring out at the blurred trees and houses rushing past. His mind replayed every insult, every stare, every smirk from the day. When he got home, his mom was in the kitchen humming softly while stirring a pot of soup. Jayden wanted to tell her everything. The comments, the notes, Ms. Dillard, all of it. But instead, he grabbed a bottle of water, mumbled, "I'm not hungry," and went straight to his room. That night, lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling again. But this time, something shifted inside him. A small, burning ember of anger, mixed with fear, and the sinking realization that this wasn't going to stop on its own. And tomorrow he already knew Miss Dillard wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. The third day started like a countdown to disaster. Jayden woke up with a knot in his stomach so tight it felt like he hadn't eaten in days. As he got dressed, his hands trembled slightly, but he told himself to push through. He had survived 2 days. Maybe today would be different. But deep down, he already knew better. When he arrived at school, he kept his head down, moving quickly through the halls like he was walking through enemy territory. As he slipped into his seat in Ms. Dillard's class, He barely had time to breathe before her voice cut through the air. Before we start today's lesson, she announced, her tone cold and sharp. "I want to address something that's been bothering me." Jayden's heart stopped. Miss Dillard's eyes zeroed in on him as if there wasn't another student in the room. "We have certain standards at Ridgewood Middle School." She continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room like a predator circling prey. "And that includes appearance, personal grooming, respect for the classroom environment." The room fell silent. "I've noticed certain hairstyles can be distracting," she said, her gaze still locked on Jayden, "especially when they're unkempt or block the face during instruction." A few students gasped softly. Others tried to hide their laughter behind their hands. Jayden sat, frozen blood rushing to his ears. He knew exactly who she was talking about. There was no need for her to say his name, and since it seems that gentle reminders aren't working, she said, "Now, walking towards his desk, I've decided to take action." Jayden's eyes widened. For a second, he didn't even understand what she meant. But when Miss Dillard reached into her drawer and pulled out a small pair of scissors, holding them up for the entire class to see every muscle in his body locked, the room collectively held its breath. "Let this serve as a warning," she said, snapping the scissors open and closed with slow, deliberate clicks. "Tomorrow, if I still can't see your eyes clearly during class, we're going to fix that problem right here." Laughter rippled across the room. Some kids clapped mockingly. Others just stared, their faces pale, unsure if this was a joke or a threat. Jayden's throat went dry. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, Jayden practically sprinted out the door, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. In the hallway, he heard voices behind him. "She's really going to do it." "No way. She's just trying to scare him. I heard she's done it before." Jayden's mind was spinning. Done it before. That night, for the first time since moving to Ridgewood, Jayden sat on his bedroom floor, pulled out his phone, and started searching online. There wasn't much about Miss Dillard. No scandals, no articles, just a few old school newsletters mentioning her years of teaching awards. But something in her eyes, the way she smiled while holding those scissors, told Jayden that this wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And tomorrow felt like a countdown to something he wasn't ready for. Lying in bed, he pulled the covers over his head, squeezing his eyes shut as tight as he could, but sleep didn't come. Only fear, and the terrifying question echoing in his mind. What's she going to do to me? The next morning, Jayden barely touched his breakfast. His mom noticed, but didn't push. She assumed it was just first week of school jitters. If only she knew the truth. Jayden stood in front of the mirror staring at himself. His dreadlocks framed his face like always. He thought about tying them back, maybe even wearing a hat, but school rules didn't allow hats indoors. And besides, why should he have to hide who he was? With a deep, shaky breath, he grabbed his backpack and headed out. The walk to school felt slower than usual, like time was dragging him closer and closer to something inevitable. When he stepped into Miss Dillard's classroom, she was already there, standing by her desk, waiting. Her eyes locked onto him the second he entered. Without a word, she reached into her desk drawer again. Jayden's stomach flipped, and there they were, the scissors, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like something out of a nightmare. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire class to hear, stepped to the front. Jayden froze in his seat. "I said, front and center," she repeated, tapping the scissors against her palm. For a brief second, he thought about refusing. His heart screamed at him to stay seated, to run, to do anything but what she wanted. But his body moved on autopilot. Legs shaking, he stood and walked to the front of the class. Miss Dillard stood uncomfortably close, examining his hair like it was some science experiment gone wrong. This is what I'm talking about," she said, lifting one of his locks with 2 fingers like it was something dirty. Unprofessional, distracting, against school grooming standards. The classroom was silent, but the tension was electric. Some students looked horrified, others entertained. Jayden's breathing became shallow. His chest tightened. And before he could process what was happening, she raised the scissors, and with a single brutal snip, she cut off one of his dreadlocks. Gasps filled the room. A girl in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. Someone in the back let out a horrified, "Oh my God." Jayden just stood there, frozen, staring at the piece of his hair now lying on the classroom floor like it didn't belong to him. His world tilted. It felt like he wasn't even inside his body anymore, like he was watching it happen to someone else. Miss Dillard wasn't done. "Maybe now you'll start taking school seriously," she said, tossing the scissors back into her desk drawer like it was nothing. Jayden's hands trembled. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. Without asking, without permission, without even waiting for the bell, he grabbed his backpack and bolted out of the classroom. Voices followed him down the hall. Did she really just, "Yo, that's messed up"? Someone recorded it, right? Jayden didn't care. He didn't stop running until he was outside gasping for air behind the gym, sinking to the ground with his back against the wall, hugging his knees to his chest. His phone buzzed inside his pocket, but he didn't check it. His hands gripped at the place where his dreadlock used to be. It was gone. Just gone. For the first time in his life, Jayden felt completely powerless, humiliated, violated. Somewhere deep inside, that small ember of anger from before, he had erupted into something bigger, hotter, unstoppable. And as he sat there, tears streaming down his face, one thought burned in his mind louder than anything else. This is not over. Jayden didn't go back to class that day. He stayed hidden behind the gym until the final bell rang. Even then, he waited until the hallways cleared out before creeping toward the bus loop, head down, hood up, trying to disappear into the crowd. But disappearing wasn't an option. By the time he climbed onto the bus, the damage was already done. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's the kid, the one Miss Dillard cut. Bro, it's all over Snapchat. My cousin sent me the video. It's already getting views." Jayden slid into the very last seat by the window and kept his head turned away, pretending not to hear, but every word felt like a dagger. When he got home, he went straight to his room and locked the door. His mom called him for dinner twice. He didn't answer. She knocked her voice laced with concern, but Jayden stayed silent. Sitting on the floor with his back against the door, he finally pulled out his phone and opened Instagram. His stomach dropped. The video was everywhere. Someone had recorded the entire thing, Ms. Dillard holding the scissors, making the announcement, stepping toward him, cutting his hair. The gasps, the laughter, the stunned silence at the end. The caption, "Teacher snaps. Watch her cut. Student's hair during class." Hundreds of views, dozens of comments. Some were sympathetic. "Utah, she needs to get fired. Poor kid. That's assault." But others laughed. "Lol, she did him a favor." Finally, someone told him to cut that mop. Jayden's hands shook as he scrolled. His heart raced. The room felt smaller with every breath he took. He threw his phone across the room, hearing it crack against the wall, but even that didn't release the pressure building inside him. Later that night, Monica knocked again. "Baby, what's going on?" "Talk to me." For a few seconds, Jayden almost opened the door, almost told her everything. But then, a notification popped up on his shattered screen across the room. Another tag, another repost. It felt like he couldn't escape. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling again, he replayed the moment over and over, the cold metal of the scissors, the way Ms. Dillard smiled like she was teaching him some kind of twisted lesson, the weight of everyone's stares. Sleep didn't come, and the next morning, walking into school, felt like walking straight into a nightmare. Students lined the hallways staring as he passed. Some whispered, some laughed. Others pulled out their phones pretending to scroll, but clearly filming him from the corners of their screens. When he reached his locker, someone had scrawled in big red marker across the door, "Crybaby Parker." Jayden stood frozen, staring at it. Then he heard the laughter behind him, the same group of boys from the cafeteria. Ryan was at the center, grinning like it was all one big joke. "Better get used to it," Ryan said, patting him mockingly on the shoulder as he walked by. Jayden's throat tightened, and just when he thought the day couldn't get worse, Miss Dillard walked past him in the hallway, didn't even glance his way, but casually muttered under her breath, "Next time, follow instructions." That was it. The final crack in whatever strength Jayden had left. Something inside him snapped. He grabbed his phone, opened his camera, and with shaking hands, recorded a short video. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "My teacher cut my hair in front of everyone, and nobody's doing anything." With trembling fingers, he hit upload. And for the first time in days, he felt something close to hope. The video Jayden posted didn't take long to spread. By lunchtime, it had already gained thousands of views. Comments poured in. People from other schools, other towns, even strangers he'd never met were outraged. "This is abuse," someone called the school board. "Where's this kid's mom?" By the time Jayden's mom, Monica, checked her phone during her break at the hospital, her notifications were flooded. Her heart sank as she opened the video and watched her son, her baby, crying. His hair uneven, his voice breaking. Without a second thought, she grabbed her bag and rushed out of the hospital. Within an hour, she was standing in the school office demanding to see the principal. Principal Howard, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, met her with forced calm. "Miss Parker, please, sit down. Let's talk about this." "No," Monica cut him off, voice shaking with fury. "We're not talking. You're going to tell me why a teacher thought it was okay to physically assault my child in front of an entire class." "Principal," Howard cleared his throat, "I understand you're upset, but Miss Dillard has been a respected teacher here for over 15 years. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Monica slammed her phone onto his desk, playing the video at full volume. Jayden's trembling voice filled the room. Principal Howard's face paled. I hadn't seen this footage until now," he stammered. "We'll launch an internal investigation. I promise." "Not good enough," Monica said through gritted teeth. "I want her suspended. Immediately." Outside the office, word spread fast. Students started gathering near the front office, whispering, texting, sharing the video over and over. Some teachers tried to clear the hallways, but the energy in the building had shifted. Jayden, sitting alone in the nurse's office, stared at his cracked phone screen, watching the view count climb higher and higher. And then, the messages started coming in. A kid from another school DM'd him. "Same thing happened to my cousin last year. Different teacher, but they covered it up." A parent from the neighborhood left a comment, sending this to the local news. Even his friends, people who had stayed silent before, started speaking up. In third period, a classmate named Mia, someone Jayden barely knew, stood up in the middle of the lesson and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why is she still here?" After what she did to Jayden, Miss Dillard froze mid-sentence. Her eyes darted around the room. Another student chimed in, "Yeah, why hasn't she been fired?" By the time school let out, a small group of students had gathered outside the building holding handmade signs. "Justice for Jayden, protect our students, end teacher abuse." Jayden watched from the nurse's office window, disbelief mixing with something new, something like strength. When Monica came to pick him up that afternoon, she pulled him into the tightest hug he'd ever felt. "We're going to fix this," she whispered into his hair. "I promise." By nightfall, local news stations had picked up the story. Reporters stood outside Ridgewood Middle School with microphones, narrating the day's events while parents and students gave interviews on camera. Monica contacted a civil rights attorney the next morning, and for the first time in days, when Jayden looked in the mirror, he didn't just see a victim. He saw someone fighting back. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The following morning, news vans lined the street outside Ridgewood Middle School. Reporters with cameras and microphones waited at the entrance, hoping for a statement, a glimpse of Ms. Dillard, or anything that would make the story even more explosive. Jayden sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through news articles with trembling fingers. Every major local station had picked up the story. Social media hashtags like Ashako Justice for Jayden and Stop Teacher Abuse were trending. Monica sat across from him, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit. Her eyes burned with determination. "We have a meeting with the school board this afternoon," she said, "and the lawyers already drafted a formal complaint. They're not sweeping this under the rug." Jayden nodded, still barely believing how fast things were moving. At school, things weren't much better for the administration. The hallways buzzed with rumors. Teachers whispered behind closed doors. Students walked through the corridors wearing makeshift pins made from paper small circles with Jayden's name written in black marker. During third period, when Ms. Dillard finally showed up to teach, the classroom fell silent the moment she walked in. Her usually stern face looked different today, flushed eyes darting nervously from student to student. Her voice wavered as she tried to start the lesson. But the students weren't having it. Mia raised her hand. "Are you going to apologize to Jayden?" she asked, her tone direct. Miss Dillard froze mid-sentence. "That's not appropriate for class discussion," she snapped. Another student shouted from the back, "We want an apology." Before she could respond, nearly half the class stood up, grabbed their backpacks, and walked out in protest. The hallway filled with students from other classes joining the walkout. Chants erupted from the main entrance. "Justice for Jayden, fire Ms. Dillard." No more silence. Inside the front office, Principal Howard scrambled to manage the chaos. He fielded phone calls from angry parents, concerned community leaders, and worst of all, a reporter from the local news station who had somehow slipped into the building. By early afternoon, the school board meeting room was packed beyond capacity. Parents, teachers, students, and news crews filled every seat, with more people standing in the hallways. Monica stood at the front, holding Jayden's hand tightly. Beside them was their attorney, Mr. Alvarez, a sharp, no-nonsense civil rights lawyer with a reputation for making schools nervous. When Principal Howard took the microphone, his voice was shaky. "We acknowledge the seriousness of the situation," he began, "and we want to ensure that every student feels safe and respected." Monica stood abruptly, cutting him off. "My son was assaulted on school property by a teacher in front of witnesses. And you want to talk about feelings?" The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled to jot down quotes. Ms. Dillard sat quietly in the corner, her face pale, hands trembling in her lap. Then Mr. Alvarez stepped forward, his voice cool but firm. "We're filing a lawsuit against Ridgewood School District for assault, emotional distress, and failure to protect a student from discrimination and abuse," he announced. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jayden stood silently, heart pounding, his mom's hand still gripping his. For the first time in days, he felt powerful, seen, protected. As the meeting wrapped up, Principal Howard made a final hurried announcement. Effective immediately, Ms. Dillard is suspended pending further investigation. Cheers broke out among the students and parents in the room. Jayden exhaled a mixture of relief and exhaustion flooding through him. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about Ms. Dillard anymore. This was about every kid who'd ever been silenced. And the fight wasn't over yet. In the days that followed, Jayden's story went national. Major news outlets picked it up. His video was reshared by celebrities, activists, and educators all over the country. Talk shows debated it. Podcasts discussed it. Even school districts in other states began reviewing their own policies on teacher conduct. But for Jayden, the attention was overwhelming. Some nights he lay awake scrolling through messages, hundreds from kids who'd experienced similar things but never had the courage to speak up. You're brave. Thank you for sharing your story. You spoke up for all of us. The weight of it was heavy. But healing too. One afternoon, about a week after the suspension announcement, Ridgewood Middle School held a special assembly. Parents, students, and teachers filled the gymnasium. Monica sat in the front row, her hands tightly folded in her lap. Mr. Alvarez stood beside her, offering a reassuring nod. Principal Howard approached the microphone, cleared his throat, and announced that after reviewing the incident, Ms. Dillard had been officially terminated from her teaching position. Cheers erupted. Students stood applauding. Some even whistled. But for Jayden, the most powerful moment wasn't the applause. It was when Principal Howard turned to him and said in front of everyone, on behalf of Ridgewood Middle School, "Jayden Parker, we owe you an apology." Jayden stood slowly, heart racing, and for the first time in front of the entire school, he spoke. "I didn't ask for this to happen," he said, voice steady but emotional. "I just wanted to come here, learn, and be treated like everyone else. No kid, anywhere, should have to go through what I went through." The gym erupted in cheers again. Teachers clapped. Parents nodded with teary eyes. After the assembly, as Jayden walked through the halls, students high-fived him. Some hugged him. Others simply smiled their eyes, saying what words couldn't. By the time he got home that night, Jayden sat on his bed and stared at the ceiling again. But this time, there was no fear, no anxiety, just peace, and a quiet but fierce pride in knowing. He stood up for himself, and for others, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak when the world expects you to stay silent. Jayden's story isn't just about one bad teacher. It's about every kid who's been silenced, every student who's been judged for how they look, where they're from, or who they are. But what Jayden taught us is that standing up for yourself, even when your voice shakes, can change everything. Today, Ridgewood Middle School has new policies. Jayden has new friends, new confidence, and a community that stood behind him. And for anyone out there feeling powerless right now, remember this: you matter. Your voice matters, and no one has the right to take that away from you. If you want to hear more real stories like this, please hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.